There's a moment when you realize the stories we never record can quietly disappear. Cristian knows that moment well. After losing the chance to capture his grandmother's story, he began asking a bigger question about memory, legacy, and what we leave behind. In this conversation, Cristian shares how grief, technology, and a deep love of storytelling led him to build something that helps people become the authors of their own lives. It's a reminder that your story matters and that saying it out loud can change everything.
There is a point in life where it's too late. A lot of stuff, it's unsaid for a reason. A lot of stuff is actually hard to put into words. It's hard to articulate. It's hard to unpack emotionally what you're going through. And some of the stuff, we're just too busy.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea, that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am sitting here with Cristian. Hello, Cristian.
Hey, Matt. Good to be here.
Well, thank you for wanting to be a part of this life shift journey.
I'm excited to get into the origin story a little bit and unpack this stuff. But basically, just for context, I started a company about a year ago called Autograph. And what we do is we interview folks over the phone about their life, not unlike this podcast, but more for private sharing and for self-reflection, and to share those moments in life where perspective shifts or where the hard lessons are earned with our loved ones in a high trust, high safety way. So the basic way we work is we have an AI interviewer called Walter. Walter will call you over the phone, interview you about your life. And after every call, we process the recording and generate a transcript. And we create these Wikipedia-style pages for your life, with a page for every person, every place, every story, for themes in your life. You may be interested in philosophy, music, what have you. We all have these themes in our lives. And, you can share those library pages with whoever you want. You could create groups to add your family members to it. And so you can start building out, your family library of wisdom and earned lessons that then can be passed down to future generations. In the age of AI, we also do this we're able to do this pretty crazy thing. That is, we can create a model of the person that sounds like them and speaks like them and has all their memories. Because a lot of times we don't know what we don't know about our family. And our idea is that as the next generation is going through life, sharing their journey, Walter can say, hey, this reminds you of something that your grandpa went through when he moved to New York. Do you want to talk to him for 15 minutes? And so the future would be able to talk to the past and get to know it firsthand, not through, all the weird distorted incentives that we have to pass down knowledge from one generation to the next today. And so it's, as you may imagine, it's very high emotion, high contact sport to be in this business, because, people come to us at the peaks and valleys of life, right? When, some milestone is accomplished, some big birthday, some big anniversary, or also when you get bad news from the doctor. Right? Or when, you get one of those precious reminders of how limited time really is and how it's too easy to take it for granted. And so we want to create, the entire experience to honor that sentimental place where people come to us with, and to enable people to start taking ownership of their own story as well. Like a lot of times, unless you're very intentional about, self-reflection and understanding, that, this thing that I think I am is really just a product of the stories I keep repeating to myself, or that get repeated to me even if I don't want to. It's the story of grandma and, the same family mythology that you inherit growing up. It's the story that you tell yourself when you wake up in the morning and for a second you don't know who you are and you reboot your computer. We're very happy that, seeing these library pages reflecting your life back at you leads to this ownership. You feel like the main character in your story, and you feel like the author of your own story. Like every decision we make is a plot twist that we are the authors of. And I've been really fortunate that, I've been able to find, this thing to channel happens to be at the intersection of all my interests. It's AI, it's storytelling, it's media, it's psychology,
You found the right place if those are all your interests.
Yeah, I certainly feel very fortunate, but the path there was not expected at all. It was a very roundabout, a scenic route.
Yeah. I think that's important though, to realize that some of us have these dreams early on, or we make little pieces of it along, and then something almost cataclysmic happens in which all the pieces kind of come together. I don't know why I just made that noise, which was very weird. But I think that, it's a beautiful thing because sometimes we just discount certain things or we don't allow ourselves to bring all those pieces together. And here you are, probably in a beautiful way, helping yourself through this company, and not financially. I mean, more like in a intrinsic type way. You're kind of helping yourself feel differently, but also the power of story is, as you described, so impactful for the one telling it, the one hearing it, and the people that are witnessing it from a side or seeing the power that it's giving others. And like you mentioned, I see that so often on this show of how maybe someone's telling that story for the first time, and the power of getting it out of their head and into words is so indescribable, I think, until it happens to you and you're like, either it's really not as messy as I thought it was, or this is something I can move forward with, or I can learn from this. But when it's in our head, either we forget it, we create our own version of it that isn't true, or we just kind of dismiss it. So I think it's beautiful what you're doing, and I'm so curious as to how we got there, but I don't know if you want to button that up.
No, I had a note there that is like, part of the whole premise of this thing is like, how do we account for what is unsaid? There is a point in life where it's too late. And so, a lot of stuff, it's unsaid for a reason, a lot of stuff is actually hard to put into words. It's hard to articulate. It's hard to unpack emotionally what you're going through. And some of the stuff we're just too busy. And so there's low hanging fruit in terms of expressing how people feel to you or what people mean to you, that if you really were for a second to think about, admit the fact that I'm going to be gone someday. What do I want the record to show about my lived experience as a human being? And you'd be surprised at like, oh man, like this person in 7th grade, this teacher who I rarely think about, changed my life. They instilled a love of reading that eventually compounded and took me on a journey that I couldn't really describe. But I don't do enough to let the record show the importance of that moment, right? Hundreds of examples like these. And if you get to the deeper stuff where it's like some of the harder to formulate things, the act of saying them can be extremely cathartic. Even if it's a very simple conclusion, like, why did you do that? Well, because I love that person, or because I can't stand that person, or because, and there's a, you are witnessing your own self-discovery by our journey of discovering you. And it's, yeah, I don't know. I get fulfilling. Really excited about it. Yeah.
I can tell.
Yeah.
I think that's
but the
great.
journey here was pretty crazy.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of paint the picture of the before version of Cristian, before kind of the main life shift moment? And you can go back as far as you need to kind of give us some context, but this is your story to tell, so I don't want to tell you where to start.
I appreciate that. I'm just going to start from the beginning. And, I think I am in my main character era. So I think, my whole life has led up to this moment. So I'll paint a brief picture of what that was like. But I grew up in Paraguay, of all places. Paraguay is, a little country in the middle of South America, Spanish speaking, has about 90% of the population also speaks Guarani, the native language. It's a very interesting case study sociologically, Paraguay, about, social dynamics and whatnot. It's a small landlocked country in a neighborhood with big countries like Argentina and Brazil, a lot of, violence in our history. But ultimately, Paraguay is, if you're a Lord of the Rings person, it's basically like the Shire. So it's very tranquil, very idyllic. It's about agriculture. Nobody ever leaves. And so there's like multiple generations of folks that are all co-located within the same 20 block radius or something. And so there's always an event. There's always a wedding, a birthday, a baptism, a funeral, a graduation. And family dynamics are also different, where your family is basically your extended family, like with your first cousins. Extended family is your second cousins, and your nuclear family is like your intimate core. And so it's not uncommon for families to have regular family lunches like every Saturday or so, with, whole one side of the family, like all the cousins, because families are bigger. These are also bigger gatherings. Anyway, all this to say, I grew up in a very familial environment where there was always like stories and families and arguments and like people debating, the future of the world and what have you. And to add to that crazy mix, my parents are both tech entrepreneurs, which is very rare in Paraguay. I mean, there's basically no tech scene, and they're too crazy. I don't even know what they were thinking, but they took, they studied computer science in the 80s in Paraguay. Way before there was the concept of a personal computer. They had to like literally break into the university to like use the computer, the mainframe, after hours.
The whole room.
Yeah, exactly. And growing up, I watched them try and try and try different flavors of technological solutions for problems. Anything from, they were all, my dad taught at college too. So he always had a flair of education in the family. And so they ran essentially like software teaching skills for high schoolers program where like they would license out, like they would teach IT and they would teach kids all across the country things like Microsoft Word, Excel, basic programming, and that kind of stuff. And 100 iterations of these, like there was that for a while. They sold, Microsoft box software. They sold video games. And it wasn't until I was like in my early teens or maybe even mid-teens that they discovered that SMS was going to be a thing. Their text messages were sort of becoming all the rage, and so they would build out the SMS infrastructure for the AT&Ts of Latin America and Africa. And anyway, this was a very inspiring story because and I should say they work together, so they're 50% partners in the business. And my mom's the CEO, my dad's the CTO. So this was all very like the more time flies by, the more I'm like, this was a very unique setup. Everything was subverted. And anyway, so I grew up in this context. Another like little tidbit about my upbringing that I think is pretty important is Paraguay is a very Catholic country. But my mom is very Catholic. My dad is Protestant. My dad, his side of the family is originally from Norway and Britain. And so he is Anglican, and I went to an Anglican school. So I always had this internal, critical lens of the water around me because, in the Protestant school, they would be like, well, Catholicism is great, but they do these things, which is different. And of course, everywhere else, it would be like, yeah, the Protestants are different. They do it. So there was always like an ambient, like not everything is what it seems, which I think sort of carries, a long way growing up. Anyway, all this to say, I grew up in this environment and my parents encouraged me to do really well in school. They were expanding their business internationally. We started thinking internationally. I applied to school in the US, and by some miracle, the stars align and I get into Stanford. I get admitted into Stanford. And, that was definitely a life shift moment, 100%. I don't know what would have happened to my life if I didn't end up going there.
Was it a culture shock?
Not at all, fortunately.
No? Okay.
Or very minimally. Like the culture shock to me was always reverse culture. Whenever I came back to Paraguay, I would notice all these little cultural artifacts that had been invisible to me because I was submerged in them. But now having spent time abroad, then I get back and like, that's very interesting, which I think is a very healthy exercise for everybody to do, is like to spend some time in a different culture and then come back and realize that the way you do things is just as quirky as what we think other cultures do in a quirky way, right?
It's interesting though. I always think of how so many people that are from other countries, when they come to the US, they have so much more context of the world in different, and Americans are this is painting with a very big brush here, but Americans don't normally have that experience, or they choose not to. They're not well traveled compared to other parts of the world, and therefore they don't have as much exposure. You're seeing it now in 2025, 2026, just in how people interact with each other, right? And so that's kind of where that question came from, is like, does coming from a place that is so connected, so familial, so probably loving, caring, and all these elements that come with that, coming to America, which isn't necessarily known for those kind of things. That's where my mind was going, is if you found like, oh, wow, people are a little disconnected here comparatively.
Well, yeah, there was definitely a different value set, in growing
You're
up.
kind.
It's
That's
it's my media training. I'm just kidding. Well, like in Paraguay, it's all about who you're related to, like who's your family, like let me place you on this map that everybody knows each other. Here in the U.S. is a lot more professional, like you kind of move out of your house at 18 and you kind of have to fend for yourself, and you have to accrue your resume virtues, that those are your kind of your identifiers. You meet somebody at a party and you ask them what they do, not who their parents are, who their relatives are, right? But the other thing that I think is interesting is America exports a lot of culture, so like it was easier for me to understand the map coming to America because there's so many TV shows and movies, and so it's more familiar to navigate something where you already have cultural artifacts about than if you're immersed in that all the time and then you go somewhere that you don't have as much exposure to, then you're gonna be met with that stuff anyway.
Yeah. I could see how it would feel like living in a TV show. if
Oh,
that.
wow. In 2026? What do you mean?
Yes, exactly. No, I love that. And did you have ties to Stanford, or was this something that you just knew they were good for what you wanted to do?
I mean, there's a bit more lore here, but my mom had spent a year in Michigan when she was 11 to learn English, and she stayed with a family. It was her godfather and his kids, who happened to be distant cousins of ours. And this family is extremely, extremely high achieving. So like all the kids went to Ivy Leagues, all of them have graduate degrees, truly like gifted folks. And in fact, the most intellectual of them had gone to MIT. And so I wanted to go to MIT. That was the carrot that was always dangled in front of me. And so it wasn't until I was in senior year that I had to apply to school and realize, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about how to apply to school in the US. I hadn't taken the SAT. I hadn't really done anything. And so it became apparent that you need to hedge your bets. Like it's a moonshot to get into any one of these universities. And so like you have to kind of like try a few. And Stanford was it was a begrudged thing that I applied to Stanford because I didn't really know much about it. And California is very far from Paraguay. Like we have a lot closer connections to the East Coast. And, it happened that this was around the time that the Facebook movie came out. And so like there was a bit more of the, wait a minute, Silicon Valley is actually where a lot of these innovations are coming from. That's where Facebook is. That's where Apple is. That's where Google is. And so and then, later when you connect the dots backward, given my family's entrepreneurial background, the match was a lot closer with Stanford. And of course, then there's the whole life-changing stuff of I met some of my best friends there, met my wife there, discovered this major that changed my life called symbolic systems. And symbolic systems,
not one that you hear too often.
It is not. It is
maybe in your circles.
Well, yeah, I guess I'm kind of in it, right? But it's a flavor of cognitive science. It's the Stanford spin on cognitive science, where it's a bit more abstract than how do brains work. It's more how do systems that process symbols work. And this is, minds and machines kind of the tagline. And so what I really liked about it is that I could swap out, all the chemistry requirements from computer science and fill those with philosophy, psychology, and linguistics. And given my background, I had always been interested in education. I'd always been interested in the effect that technology has in society. Like the why, not just the how. And symbolic systems became this kind of like catch-all discipline or interdisciplinary discipline that allowed me to explore, like how do these systems affect the economy? How does these systems affect geopolitics? How does it affect my own mental health? And what is the relationship between language and my sense of being? And, it got me, thinking about AI pretty early on, because a lot of the thought experiments were like, well, if AI becomes autonomous, when do you give it rights? So this was like, I can't believe this was 10 years ago, but the conversations around like moral agency of a Waymo, for instance, a Waymo runs into someone or has to make a split second decision about whether to pump the brakes or hit the gas. Whose safety is the Waymo prioritizing? The passenger, the pedestrian, and who's liable? Is it the software manufacturer? Is it the car manufacturer? Is it the sensor manufacturer? It's not easy at all, right? And I also just always like the big ideas. Like I enjoy being human so much that I've always been interested in like, but what is really going on? Like why does it feel like this? Anyway, all that to say, I turned that into a job teaching computer science at Stanford. I love computer science. I mean, like I think that was if there's one thing that changed the way I see the world, it's definitely learning to think like a programmer. Not so much in sort of the nitty gritty aspects of it or code specifically, but the idea that you can split problems into smaller sub problems that you need to solve once. And once you solve it, you don't need to worry about it again. And a lot of problems are just repeat sub problems that if you're disciplined about executing, you can actually do anything.
You know this is going to sound so wrong, but forgive me. It's just what I think. It sounds like you were, and maybe you're just painting a beautiful picture here, but it sounds like you kind of knew that you wanted to do something bigger. You wanted to learn, you wanted to serve. Did you have it the way you're painting it? There were no roadblocks really in your world. Like, did you see roadblocks? Were you someone that was like, oh, that's just something else to overcome? Or were you someone that were like, oh man, this is going to stop me in my tracks? Because it feels like you were just rolling. Like you were that snowball going down the hill and things were just getting better.
I think there's some sanitization going on. You know, everything was an obstacle. You know, like I wasn't.
But did you see it as such?
Not as an insurmountable. I don't think I meant anything insurmountable at that point. There were many like close calls, I think, of things where I was like, I didn't want to think about it too much because if I thought about it, it would have seemed insurmountable. And then I would have had to go up against my own perception. But if I didn't think about it too much, then I could just steamroll through it. It's so tiny. Well, thank you. I don't know. It's also like hindsight 2020. So I think that I was also going through a bit more fear, but you know, all of these were insecurities and ambiguities that I had. You know, like it's not easy to get a job teaching at Stanford, and so it took me 4 times to apply.
Okay.
That kind of.
I mean, we don't need to sanitize it. Part of me is thinking the people around me. I know a handful of people that nothing was insurmountable to them. Like there was never like oh, that's just an extra challenge. It wasn't like, well, that's going to stop me dead in my tracks. But most of the people that I knew, we were the worriers. We were the ones that were like, well, that doesn't seem like it's going to work out. And for me, it's because of the early trauma. Like I became a perfectionist and all I did was the things that I know I could be perfect at. I didn't try for that, you know, that big mountain. I would try for the smaller one because I knew even with the little challenge, I could still do it. And so I never really challenged myself. I never really dreamed about things. And so that's where all of this is coming from of like, was it really that easy? Because for me, it was so hard, even though I knew I was not doing the things that I probably was capable of, because I thought if I do this wrong, my dad's going to leave me. My mom left in my, 8-year-old brain. And so that followed me to like 30. So it's so curious and naive to think that everything was sunshine and rainbows for you as you were going through this journey. But also at the same time, it kind of feels like everything was in a great momentum for you. And that's probably your character and the family dynamics that you had growing up around you. And it wasn't this one, you're doing it all for yourself, but rather it's this all for one kind of mentality.
Yeah, I think now that you probe, I think that there's, I found myself in a very unique position. I was the second undergrad ever at Stanford, a Paraguayan undergrad at Stanford. So I had this huge chip on my shoulder around, representing this place that nobody knows, since I'm moving to the US, by and large, I am the only Paraguayan that people I meet know. And so I carry the whole, I have to perform for the continent, basically. And I had, the one thing that my parents did very well is to disambiguate or to sort of disenchant imposter syndrome very early on. So if you find, they always say things like, the world is of the shameless, if you're shameless and you show up and you're like, showing up is 80% of the battle. And so if you find yourself in a position where, and I found repeatedly, Stanford was a huge culture shock. My gosh, I was quote unquote the smart one at my school, and then you go and you meet these like, oh my God, you are smart. My goodness, same thing later on when I joined Google, like it's, so it turns out I'm not just not the smart one anymore. It turns out I'm the stupid one, and
okay, so it wasn't all just this paved road of gold for you as you were kind of walking down coming to the States.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, like
you just were instilled with things from your family. And I think that's really a lot of the people that I know didn't have that because of the time period in the States. We didn't have a similar connected community like you did.
Yeah. So I think there was, I felt that my tribe supporting me in the background always, but just for fun context, like even this is how close it got, my deal with my parents was that they were going to pay for my personal expenses freshman year, and sophomore year on, I have to figure out how to pay for my own personal expenses. So I needed a job. And so I was applying to teach computer science, and I applied once, I didn't get it. Fall quarter, I applied again, winter quarter, didn't get it. I applied again, spring, finally got it. By the time my paycheck came in, like my first, like undergrad teacher, computer science teacher paycheck came in, I had $23 in my bank. So it was one of those like, don't look down, just keep going. And then,
But a lot of people would fold there. I feel like a lot of people would fold and give up. So there's something, some seed planted in you that has grown to be assertive in that way and go-getter. I love it. I love your story. And I think that part of me is a little jealous that I didn't do the same thing. But, I'm also a product of my circumstances too. And yours.
And everybody is. I mean, like, I think there's, we all get certain cards and it's about, and nobody knows the inner game either, right? So there's, I mean, yeah. I think.
But that's why we have these conversations. I think people don't talk about.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's so many layers to it too, right?
Right.
Like there's, I don't know, like there's so many layers of interpersonal connection that come out in these conversations that I love so much, unpacking one's personality. Anyway,
carry on.
So I always loved education and like, I love, the process of education. We were a very reading oriented family. So I loved reading. And I turned my teaching job at Stanford to a software engineering position at Google. This was also a very scary thing at the time. I applied to 40 companies in the Bay Area. One of them responded with one interview that I worked my butt off to perform on. Fortunately, got an internship and eventually turned that into a full-time job where I was a sort of vanilla software engineer at Google doing shopping ads. And so if you search for like HDMI cable near me, you get the little carousel on Google search. That was the job basically. And like at this point, it seems like there's a story arc happening because there is now. But like at that point, I was just trying to figure out, I was dating my now wife and I wanted to and she's a doctor. So she was going to go to med school. So I wanted to work for a company that would allow me to move offices, that would help me with my immigration journey. And it just so happened that Google worked that way. And Google was an amazing place to learn how to be a software engineer. Google's a weird place. I mean, like doesn't make sense. It just undermined everything that I took for granted about a workplace, no hours. You self-report, like you evaluate yourself. You set your own deadlines. It was very self-guided. And I'm like, how does that make sense? Like I grew up in a place where you do as you're told. At 7 a.m. you're supposed to be here and you check out at 6 and, like whatever you're instructed to do stuff. And here you're supposed to find out what you're supposed to. Did that for 2 years. And then I got promoted and I wanted to do something that was closer to my interests. So I joined an education team at Google. That was an AI app that you open it up, it opens to the camera, you take a picture of your homework, and we helped you solve your homework. So this was like an AI tutor, like 2019. So before any of the AI craziness today. And that was an amazing experience. I mean, like that was really cool because it was impactful. It was cutting edge. I was doing AI stuff, which I liked, and I was doing education stuff, which I liked. And, and it was great. But one of the things that happened in that team was that, it was very startup-y. Everybody had to do a bit of everything. I was doing some design. I was doing some project management kind of stuff. And when we launched and did really well, like number one in the EDU category in the App Store, basically throughout the pandemic, because, then the school shut down and kids had no support. And But then, there's the classic Google thing that happened where, we launched the product and there was no clear follow-up vision. And so, within a month or two of launching, it was put in maintenance mode. And that was pretty disheartening. And around the time I realized that I enjoyed being a software engineer, but it wasn't my calling. I felt that I could have more impact in the world by developing other stuff, like interpersonal skills or thinking like an economist or thinking. Anyway, I sort of wanted to branch out from my just sit at the computer and code. And at the time, pandemic was in just beginning. My wife was doing med school in Chicago and my parents were all in Paraguay. And I was like, man, if it's the end of the world, I want to spend more time with the people I love. And so I decided to move to Chicago and work remotely for my parents who were pivoting their business. SMS isn't a thing anymore. And so, they were going through their whole existential, decision-making of what to do next. And what they landed on was that they want to be a platform for future Latin American entrepreneurs to have capital to support their growth, journeys. And so that was a big culture shock. Talk about culture shock, going from Google to working for the family business where you're not just employee numbers so-and-so, but you're the son and you're the older brother and you are the, it's a lot. There's layers of, I don't want to say politics, but certainly the interpersonal dynamics, right? But it was all these conversations about okay, the world looks different. Our family looks different. I came to the US, my sisters, both of them studied in the US. We were all kind of living in different places. And so what are the structures that we can put in place to maintain our family culture that we're such big fans of, How do we think about legacy? How do we think about, impact in the world? And what do we want to be left of us after this moment that we share disappears? A lot of conversations about what happens if, bad news A arrives, what happens if bad news B arrives, and that kind of stuff. So very sobering and in general, in the context of the world, it was very heavy stuff, right? So then I did that for 2 years and it was great, but my parents are the ultimate founders. And so they would say things like, you have to think like a founder and act like a founder and build your founder instincts. And I realized that I don't think I could fake it, and I don't think I could simulate these founder aspects. I think I need to put myself in the position of a founder to actually be able to understand what it means to create something from nothing and to steer a little, steer something into reality, and
I laugh because I feel like that's just such the antithesis of my experience where I'd be
really?
well, I just can't do it. So I'm just going to keep doing what I was doing before. Yeah. So I love that.
But, okay. Then I think this is the part where our paths become a little more similar, is that I had made a commitment that I was going to do something on my own, but I didn't know what. And so after med school was done and my wife got her residency match to San Francisco, we moved back to the Bay. And within, a couple months of each other, we got engaged. I turned 30, moved to a new city. I knew that I was going to start my own thing. And I had this not quite breakup conversation pending, but almost breakup conversation pending with my family. And ChatGPT dropped at the same time, in this context. And so this was kind of there's this tool that I think I'm formally trained on. I have experience in building, and this is going to be the platform that I use to build something, but I didn't know what. And so I decided this was a crazy moment. I don't know what came over me, but I decided, all in, I'm going to quit the job. I'm going to trust myself that when I hit the eject button, I'm going to hold on to something. And I was very open with myself that, I was not dogmatic about what that something would be. If I, with a white, blank whiteboard, I say, what are all the possible paths I can take? I could be a coach. I could be a software engineer. I could be an entrepreneur. I could start a nonprofit. All these very different flavors of life. I could go into academia and do a PhD. I could get an MBA. I could be a lawyer, and it was pretty overwhelming, especially because, ChatGPT had just come out and I saw how this was going to change everything. And so I couldn't really bet on anything because I didn't know that anything would have solid ground underneath it. The only thing that kind of persisted this 3-month process where I took time off to figure out my next swing was this idea for a story. I had been collecting notes, like forever growing up. But on the evening of turning 30, I had this like opening scene for a story. I didn't know what it was, but it was like these two characters that were worried in an alley. And I kind of started like, pulling at the yarn a little bit, and I was like, oh, the character's named Rabbit. That's an interesting name. These other characters named Orphan. That's interesting. What's their backstory? And sort of like this would be the procrastination thing that I would actually make progress on. Like, oh, there's a story that kept evolving, and by the time the 3 months had gone by, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I had to finish this story. The story had become the sort of lightning rod for I can tell my own lived experience, and I have to get all my philosophy in order, and I have to sort of game out what I think is going to happen. And I get to sort of express some of the angst around having lived through COVID and how that felt in a world that had seemed to go completely crazy. And so I was just trying to grasp at like, how do we keep sanity around in case something else happens like this in the future? And I should say, for this 3-month process, I remember thinking like, man, I really wish I could use AI to help me write my next chapter in my life. If AI knows me and knows my family and my cultural background, and like, I wish that like AI could help me imagine the potential futures and help me like say, okay, this is the path I want to take. In absence of that, I was writing my own story. So I commit to writing this book, and it's the most transformational thing I've ever done by far. In this journey, all these things around accepting that I'm the main character in my story, and that I literally took time to become the author of my story. It took on this almost spiritual quality where it was like, wait a minute, like if I have actual control over how I interpret my identity, then I kind of am invincible. Like I can always reframe a challenge as, a workout, or a setback as like you can connect the dots in a way that serves you and doesn't hold you back. And it wasn't like, this was excruciating, by the way. I mean, like I was in tears half of the time, just like sort of like allowing myself to process some of these narrative junctures that had shaped who I was. But at every corner, there was emotional release because I was allowed to see myself for like the human being living them. Even when some of those emotions were coming through the voice of the villain or through the voice of, a side character.
So is this like a parable and was kind of like your life in that form?
Basically, it's like my story.
It wasn't like a memoir.
Not a memoir at all. It's a sci-fi story about a spy and like infiltrating an Elon Musk neuro company that, gets psychedelic. It's completely different. Like,
but you were able to kind of process, like insert your life and stories through that. Kind of reminds me of something else. I'm trying to think of the book. Ender's Game? Was it?
It's a bit of a trope. I mean, probably the most famous one is the Divine Comedy. Okay. So Dante it's like like I didn't even know this at the time. Later, some friend told me like, oh, this is what Dante tried to do. And, basically it's like, what is going on through the lens of the story where the protagonist happens to be the author.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's beautiful. I think there's so much, like we said before, that power in story, is so much there, but you really understood yourself and the journey through that.
Transformational. I mean, truly, truly super important. And I remember thinking, I wish everybody could take the time to write out their story so that they could go through this thing that I went through, because, like that was a before and after moment where I had like no clarity on where my life was going to go next, what the output of this book was going to be, am I going to publish it? What am I thinking? I had some like more, it was a bit of a Hail Mary too, in the sense that like I saw where AI was going, and I realized that the only thing that can save us is if we train AI with good data. And if we feed AI garbage data that is exemplary of the worst of us and not the best of us, then we're gonna get super God, AI machine God that is the worst of us, as opposed to something that could be beyond exciting, right? But so then I was trying to say, what is the software update I can write in narrative form that would when pass through AI training systems would upgrade the machine so that it starts thinking about how are we part of the same experience and not how are we different experiences and I need to beat you. And, the idea was like, you do it for machines, it may work for humans too. So in any case, I finished the story and then I'm like, what happens next? What do I do? I had gone through I was Alice coming back from Wonderland and I was like, so what comes next? And I learned about the publishing industry and discovered that the publishing industry is in the 1600s still, So I realized that even if I, no matter how I chose to publish the book, I was going to have to do some promotion myself. So in order to build a tiny little audience to then sell the book to, I started a podcast because I kind of bought into this whole idea of being an author in the 21st century, which it really is like, it's a book and a podcast and events and all that kind of stuff. And so I started a podcast to talk about the ideas in the book roughly, or like the stuff that is all in this library, like science fiction, poetry, philosophy, psychology, AI research, software engineering, the economy and jobs, and just really try and understand like what happens to our humanity in the age of AI, like what is left of us. And I'm, as not quite, I made it to 50 episodes, so not quite the 237, but I also fell in love with the format. It's the best. It's the best. It's storytelling, but also human connection. And you get to like meet someone who you probably otherwise had no chance of meeting.
Exactly.
And you get to jam about the stuff that is important to them and that you find important to you too. And so that was another sort of inspiration moment where I remember thinking, man, I wish I could interview everybody on Earth. I love people and I love discovering who people are. And I think I meet everybody and there's a reason for my meeting them. And I want to get to that reason as fast as possible because I'm excited about it. And so I remember thinking, I wish I could interview everybody on Earth. So I did that for a bit. And, I was doing consulting gigs here and there to pay the bills. And I realized that one of the people I should be interviewing, not necessarily for the podcasting, not to publish, but to record, was my grandma. My mom's dad has had a crazy life story. And like her dad was an MI6 agent. Her mom was Norwegian. When the war breaks out, great grandpa says, off to the ends of the earth, to somewhere safe. And so great grandma and her two daughters ship away across the world, end up in Paraguay of all places. And they have to sort of make it as this very non-traditional family unit in a very machismo-oriented 1950s Paraguayan military dictatorship. And they made it. They absolutely made it. And they would communicate with dad over secret messages and like all of that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to unpack that mythology that had never been written down anywhere. And so we said, like next time I'm in Paraguay, let's find a time and we'll do it. And a few weeks before my trip to Paraguay, she had a stroke that left her paralyzed and incapable of having that conversation. I had lost my grandpa like a few months before, and so I was
just coming off a season of the whole world losing all these people that they loved because of COVID. And I realize now that you kind of found that spark, that light of like, there is a different purpose here for our family. And now you set this stage in which maybe you're not going to get that.
Right. And I had the outline of the questions that like I now knew were gone. Like these are things about my story that inform my grandma's personality, that in turn inform my dad's personality, that I just won't have access to, that I'll have to sort of hope to reverse engineer. But it will never be as like, it will never be certain, and it will never be as cool as getting the story as lived. Yeah. And that was the catalyst. I mean, that was the moment where I was like, okay, let's take stock of everything that happened in the last couple of years, and like, let's see if I can make all the threads come together.
Yeah, and you had all the threads.
And and I had the menu, and I looked at it like a puzzle, and I was like, how do I make this a solved problem so that nobody else has to go through this again? Like, we can't stop people from dying yet, but we can at least do something to preserve their story,
Yeah. So you took all the skills and all the things that you worked your tail off, trying to find the spot, and you found it. But it was really important now because what it's like to not have what you desired. And does that create a bigger fire to get it out there quicker or more functional or do something for other people in a faster way? Because I could feel like that
Certainly.
whole
Oh
idea
my
of
gosh.
death kind of would make you want to do it.
Yeah, I've had to go through sort of like recalibration every now and then because, the motivation of, if you ask, how many people pass away every day, then that number, if I'm in the wrong mindset, that number is very heavy. It's like, these are all the, if we think about this as a giant fire, like these are all the rooms I should be like rushing into. And so there's this like, why are we not there yet? Why are we not there yet? Why are we not there yet? So I've had to manage that, and so there's like, but this whole idea of like sort of spending a bit more time thinking about grief and death and not being and purpose, and they're kind of all intertwined. I think that was the surprising discovery to me, is that you find purpose after you're gone. Like the purpose is what happens when the traces of you are all that is left to unpack. And so can we be intentional about those traces? So Autograph emerged as this kind of, solution for people to go through the same experience that I went through when I wrote my story, but in a much easier way. So they don't have to face the blank page. It's not an editorial thing. There's no judgment. It really is, imagine a podcast about your life for everybody on earth. And as a side effect, we get all this, like this ability for the future to talk to the past that I think is a huge gift, right? And I think it's a tribute.
Legacy.
100%. And accountability too. I mean, like how many silent acts of heroism shape the world that we don't know about, It's the smile on the train and the smile on at the kiosk that put you in a good mood, that allowed you to make a slightly better decision that then shaped the course of history.
And there's so many, I would imagine, that there are so many prompts that can help people get to places and talk about things that they forgot about.
It's unbelievable.
Right. Because
it's unbelievable.
There's so many things that, especially if we're 70, 80 years old, we're not going to remember that smile until someone says something that sparks that memory to come back up, and then you share it, and now it's forever documented, which is beautiful. And something that, something that feels like so personal to me that probably your service would have been beautiful, but she wouldn't have allowed it, was I had a very close relationship with my grandmother, and she got sick. And knowing that how I lost my mom and I didn't have all this opportunity to grieve properly and do all the things, I forced the conversation with my grandmother for us to tell each other everything, not about her history necessarily, but all the things that I would have regretted not saying, all the things that she might have regretted not saying. And it feels very similar in my heart of kind of what you're doing for other people. It's like missing thing that so many people don't get to have, but like on a much bigger scale from your side. But yeah, it's like, I would probably want to document that, right? Because
for sure,
to hear all the things. Yeah.
Well, think about like a parent or a new parent that is suddenly faced with the existential stuff about becoming a parent, and like, oh my gosh, I have to get my stuff in order because I need to teach the kid. And there are thoughts that I have about stuff that I think are very important to who I am, that I would love to jot down so that at some point, like if something happens to me, the kid can have that conversation, even if it's 15 years too soon, because otherwise they may not have that conversation. So there's like, it's a time vault,
Yeah. How do you, in this service, how do you keep people from overly sanitizing their history and experiences? Because I feel like that is something, especially the older generations, even my generation, was taught to do. We were taught to only share the good things and not the hard things, not all those things. How do you approach that?
There's usually repetition helps. There's a really fun and kind of challenging product decision here around. So it gets at this really difficult question of who are we really, like a couple of notes, for example, in a certain way, we're painting a portrait of the person, right? We are engaging with the version of themselves that they want to be remembered as. And there's a sovereignty there that I think is very important to respect. I would think of my grandma, my dad, like these would be people who would not share the difficult stuff first. And so they would probably say the sanitized version, and then you can paint the portrait of them in that way, and then they feel acknowledged and valued and seen. And once you build that rapport of, okay, this is how you want to be seen, how do you see yourself? Like, what were some moments that you could have done things differently? And so it really is this long-term trust game where we
that's the safety.
It's an emotional safety thing. But I will also say that there's, we find everything, like there are people who have stories of extreme difficulty and trauma where almost the first thing that they want to share is that, because they want to say, hey, I made it. I'm on the other side of this horrible thing. And it's identity defining for me to tell you that I went to rehab, or that I was imprisoned, or, whatever it is. So we get a bit of everything. And what we want to do is create that space where people feel ultimately comfortable to share the hard stuff, the mistakes that you paid for in blood, sweat, and tears. Because at the end of the day, when the next generation is going about their life and they're thinking of making a decision, and they may not have visibility into the cost of a mistake there, that is where you want your tribe to show up and say, if I hadn't fucked up this thing, I would be in a different place now. Or conversely, if I didn't take that opportunity, or like if I hadn't taken that opportunity, I would have been nowhere. And because it's coming from a position of folks who, by biology, are designed to have your best interests at heart, it's higher signal than what you would probably get certainly from Instagram, or if I searched on Google, like what to do about this decision, you're going to get a few sort of generic life advice from the AI, as opposed to this is what, and name, you pick your name, but there's all the big life stuff, this is what a sickness does to a family. This is the cost of not paying for insurance. This is what infidelity feels like. And this is what, all the hard stuff about life. This is what getting fired feels like. Or this is what proposing to someone and them saying no feels like,
Yeah. I have a question for you, and probably one of the last questions, but this one, I want to know for you internally, in your heart, in your head, whatever that means to you, when you saw the first client's results, or first customers, or first person's results, and their reaction to it, what did that do for you?
I can't even explain it, Matt. One of the first pieces of feedback we got was, thank God you exist, because I don't know how I would have told my story otherwise. I immediately thought, thank God you exist. And it's the most motivating thing in the world. My job is to remind people that they have infinite power in the internal richness of their mind, and that their story is a hidden puzzle piece to some problem in the future. It's like unlock some kind of lock in the future that only your lived experience can inform. And whether it is because, and this is just like a function of society, right? But a lot of women, a lot of moms don't even allow themselves to feel like the protagonist in their own story. And my gosh,
I think a lot of people don't think their story matters.
Most people don't. And
so you're giving power to these people as much as you're giving to their legacy and all that stuff. You're giving the power of these people to see how much they actually do matter and what their life means to them more than other people.
Totally. And even if it's not for someone else, even if we just remind you how much your life should mean to you, that's a job well done,
Yeah.
So yeah, but as you may imagine, it's also very heavy, right? Because at the same time, we're getting such good feedback, and at the same time, we realize, oh my gosh, there's so much more to do in terms of like getting the word out there and improving the product. And Walter, he's amazing, but he has his issues, and
right.
so there's that. But don't we all? So it's extremely motivating. I have to pinch myself to realize, oh my gosh, I have an honest shot at doing this thing that I think, if done correctly, could change history. And
That's not heavy at all.
no, not at all, right?
It's a lot of responsibility, though, to hold these stories and help them and shape them by their words, but shape them into something true and authentic. Because as a lot of people are skeptical, technology can also do things that are not as great. And so I feel that there's probably a lot of that moral agency you were talking about earlier, and how do we make sure that people are protected in the way that, not in the privacy area, but really in how their story is developed, and in a way that makes sense to them and true to them.
100%. So many things, like what usage patterns are acceptable, like we don't want to build a companion that takes away from your existing social relationships, right? And so there's so many layers of ethical concerns that we oh, so many, like if you mention, like wanting to harm someone, what is our reaction? If you mention that you may be depressed or anxious or something like that, what are our protocols to forward you to the right resources?
You're doing the good work. I mean, it's all important stuff, and the end result is what's most important. And it seems like there's no better person to kind of lead the charge, because you're talking about all the right things. I think there are many tech entrepreneurs that don't have the heart that you have, not to insult people, but I think this particular venture, you have to, like, you're holding such important things that it seems to be that your heart is in the right place, which I think for here is the most important. A lot of people can come with the skills and the education, all that stuff. You have that as well, but most importantly, your reason for existing in this space is true, it seems, from our long time that we've known each other now.
No, I mean, I appreciate that so much, like when I saw what the idea meant, and I realized that the job would be performing as a character, who is the captain of this ship. And when I saw that that was the challenge, then I was like, sign me up. That's the challenge of a lifetime. Like, I will be the keeper of stories if I need to be. And I'm just playing against myself, like, what is the best version of that guy that I have to become? And no, and it means so much to hear you say that, man. I mean, like, we're certainly trying, like we're trying to do something that matters to folks, remind folks that they matter, and that technology can have a soul, if allowed
important
to express itself.
Yeah, I think that's important. Curious that if this version, we're recording here in December 2025, if this version could go back to the one that was kind of like, quit your family job and you're at the whiteboard kind of just ideating on all the possible things, is there anything that you would want to tell him?
Don't look down. So I didn't even get, so now but there was another traumatic layer that was, okay, I had the idea, but then how do you turn it into a business, like, and what's the model, and like, what are your marketing channels, and how do you sell this? Because it's like, it's not something that exists today. And how do you raise money for it? And so raising money for it was by far the hardest thing that I had to do. And that's where a lot of I connected with the real motivation for why I was doing this. Like, sure enough, there's a good influential business to be built out of this, but it's, this eventually transcended to like, oh, because I want to make a difference. And then I was like, because I want to make my parents proud. And then I was like, because I love my parents and I want to record their story. And I'm the guy who figured out that I could do that. How could I forgive myself if I wasn't that guy,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's all sorts of avenues that your story would take. I think the biggest thing for me is that the beginning of your story started with how close you are to your family, the people around you, your community. You take, all these other routes, not losing that, but here we are back again at the importance of family story, the connections that you're providing to people. So all along, that heart thread was there. Sure, there are tricks and tools and tips of things that people could do to get funding and build a product and all these things, which I'm sure is amazing. But to me, the most important thing is, when I talk to people, is like, why are we doing these things? Like, what is the point? Because for so long, I grew up thinking everything that I need to do is to make money. That's all that mattered. And it's, yeah, that's nice. We need to be able to pay our bills. But at the end of the day, I think where we find our passion, we can create something out of it that brings us the things that we need to cover the other things that we need. So I appreciate you going on this journey and telling your story in this way. I think people can learn more about you right on your website and stuff. They can probably find out more.
Certainly.
What's the best way to, like, maybe something you said triggered something in someone in a good way, and they want to share part of their story with you. Is there a way to get into your circle, learn more about your product, but also connect with you?
Yeah, of course. Best way to learn about what we're doing is at autograph.ai. We have a blog there where we constantly update what's going on. You can try out talking to Walter, get a feel for the experience. If it inspired something in you, phenomenal. But if it reminded you of a story that you know you need to keep before it's too late, we also allow you to invite other people to the platform. So you may not, it's a project. So like it may not be time for you, but it's also a great lifetime achievement award for anyone who you consider a hero. And I'll send you my like X profile on LinkedIn if people want to connect with me personally. I'm super open to chatting as well.
I think they're back to that whole power of story, back to the, basically what you're doing for the world, the power of a story right there. But for me, when something triggers something from someone else's story in someone and they've never shared it before, or they just need to get it out and be like, hey, Cristian, when you said this, I really connected with it because this is what happened to me. You're giving them a gift because now they said it out loud. Right. And maybe it's something that turns into a connection with Autograph, maybe not. But at the same time, we're trying here in these podcast conversations to help people feel less alone, to help people share their stories more. You're helping document those things in that way. And I think it's so beautiful using technology and finding that humanity that can be found there, and just helping future generations that we don't even know what they're going to look like or who they're going to be. Thank you for the work that you're putting into the world and being willing to be a part of this show.
I appreciate you saying that, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I could talk forever, but I know that I've kept everyone listening for a little bit longer than normal, and that is okay with me because I think we went exactly where we need to go. So I'm going to say goodbye right now, and I'm going to thank you all for listening and being a part of this journey. And I will be back next week with a brand new episode. And thanks again, Cristian, for just being you, doing what you do for the world.
Pleasure to be here, Matt. Excited to chat soon.
Will do. Talk to everyone soon. Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.